I keep going back to the moment right before everything broke. The way the sun felt on my shoulders, the way Julian's eyes looked, soft, sure, like he'd already decided the rest of our lives would be good. 200 people in white chairs, white roses everywhere. The garden courtyard at the Hargrove estate on Piedmont Road smelled like cut grass and expensive perfume, and I remember thinking, this is the most beautiful place I've ever stood. I was 26 years old, and I was about to marry Julian Hargrove. He was 29. His family owned half the commercial real estate in Greendale. But I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about his hands holding mine, and how steady they were. The officiant got to the part where he asks if anyone objects. You never expect anyone to actually speak. It's a formality, a leftover from another century. Then the iron garden gate creaked open. I turned, and there she was. A woman I'd never seen before. Late 60s, thin, wearing a dark coat that didn't match the weather. She walked straight down the aisle like she'd been invited. She was carrying something, a parcel, wrapped in brown paper. She didn't shout. She didn't make a speech. She set the parcel down on the altar table, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "Open it before you say I do." I don't know why I listened. Maybe it was the way she said it, like she'd been carrying those words for a very long time. I pulled the paper off. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, old, from 1952, a deed of transfer, a faded photograph of a woman I recognized immediately, my grandmother, May Whitfield. I opened the ledger, and there, in the margins, I saw her handwriting. I knew it the way you know your own mother's voice. She'd written notes, small, desperate annotations in pencil. Please, corrections, numbers that didn't add up, all ignored. The documents laid it out plainly. Julian's grandfather, Roland Hargrove Sr., had swindled my grandmother out of our family land, 40 acres along the Greendale River, through a forged contract. The entire Hargrove fortune was built on what he stole from her. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the ledger. I looked at Julian. He looked confused, lost. Then he looked at his father. Richard Hargrove was 61 years old, and I watched every drop of color leave his face. He didn't look surprised. He looked caught. The woman, I'd later learn her name was Constance Devereaux, 68, stepped back and said nothing else. She'd done what she came to do. I couldn't hear anything after that. Not the guests. Not Julian saying my name. I set the ledger down. I dropped my bouquet, white roses just like the ones lining the aisle, and I walked out through that iron gate. I could feel the veil dragging on the ground behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't say a word. I just left. I drove to 14 Larkspur Lane, still wearing the dress. My mother's bungalow, the house I grew up in. It felt smaller when I walked through the door, the way places do when you come back to them carrying something heavy. My mom, Diane, was 54. She worked at the hospital. She was supposed to be at the wedding, but she'd felt sick that morning and stayed home. When she saw me come through the front door in a wedding gown with mascara running down my face, she didn't even ask. She just held me. Then I showed her the ledger. She sat down at the kitchen table, put her reading glasses on, and went quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, tired, like she'd been waiting for this conversation for years. "Your grandmother talked about this until the day she died," she said. "She always said the Hargroves took our land, but she couldn't prove it. Nobody believed her." Grandma May died in 2011, heartbroken, poor, living in this same house. I sat on her rocking chair on the porch, Grandma May's rocking chair, and I cried until my head hurt. Not pretty crying. The kind where you can't breathe right and your whole body aches afterward. My phone buzzed every few minutes. Julian. Over and over. Calls, texts, more calls. I put it face down on the porch railing and didn't touch it. I found out later that the Hargrove family went straight into damage control. Richard Hargrove had a PR consultant and a lawyer on the phone before the caterers finished packing up. That told me everything I needed to know. Julian drove to Larkspur Lane that evening. My mom answered the door. I could hear him from the porch, his voice cracking, saying he needed to talk to me. Diane told him it wasn't a good time. She was polite about it. She closed the door gently, but she closed it. My best friend, Nomi Salazar, showed up around 9. She was 27, worked as a paralegal downtown. She didn't try to make me talk. She just made tea and sat next to me on the porch until I stopped shaking. Then she stayed the night, sleeping on the couch with one of Grandma May's quilts. I couldn't sleep. I kept turning it over. Every dinner with the Hargroves, every holiday at the estate, the way Richard always looked at me with this strange softness I'd mistaken for warmth. Was I a trophy? Was marrying me some quiet way to settle a debt they never planned to name out loud? Did Julian know? Was any of it real? The wedding gifts got returned. The caterers sent a final invoice. The Greendale Gazette ran a small notice in the Sunday edition. Whitfield Hargrove wedding postponed indefinitely. Postponed. Like it was a scheduling conflict. 3 weeks later, I was sitting at the kitchen table at 14 Larkspur Lane with a magnifying glass in one hand and a cold cup of coffee in the other. The table was buried. Yellowed documents, the leather-bound ledger, county records I'd photocopied, my laptop open to 3 different tabs. I'd thrown myself into this the way you throw yourself into anything when the alternative is falling apart. Every morning, I drove to the Greendale County Records office on Elm Street. Afternoons, I'd sit in the back room of the local historical society, pulling files. Nomi came over every evening after work, still in her office clothes, and we'd go through everything together. The 1952 deed of transfer had May Whitfield's signature on it. But when Nomi and I compared it against every piece of Grandma May's known handwriting, birthday cards, old checks, letters, it didn't match. Not even close. The loops were wrong. The slant was wrong. It was forged. I tracked down Constance Devereaux. She was living at a boarding house on Maple Avenue, in a small room with lace curtains and a radiator that clanked. She was 68. She moved slowly. She opened the door like she'd been expecting me. She told me everything. She'd been Roland Hargrove Sr.'s secretary in the early 1950s. She was there when he forged the deed. She watched him do it. When she tried to speak up, he threatened her job, her family, everything. She was young and scared, and she stayed quiet. For decades. Now she was old and alone and had nothing left to lose. She said she couldn't die with it still inside her. I asked her why the wedding. Why that moment? She looked at me and said, "Because there were 200 people watching. He couldn't make that disappear." Nomi told me we needed Constance's story on paper, signed, notarized, something a court couldn't ignore. So that's what we did. Money was tight. I'd quit my teaching job at Greendale Elementary to plan the wedding and move into the Hargrove estate. That future didn't exist anymore. Mom took extra shifts at the hospital. I picked up substitute teaching work, a day here, 2 days there. It barely covered groceries. Every evening I came home and spread the documents out again. I was exhausted. Some nights I fell asleep at the table with my face on a stack of photocopies. Nomi would cover me with a blanket and leave a note. "Eat something. I mean it." Julian sent a handwritten letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address, just my name in his handwriting. He swore he never knew about the fraud. He said he loved me. He begged me to meet him. I read it 3 times. I folded it. I put it in the kitchen drawer. I didn't respond. I was learning who I was without him, without the Hargroves, without the version of my future that had been built on something stolen. It hurt in a way I didn't have words for, but it was getting clearer. 6 weeks after the wedding, that wasn't. I was in the attic at 14 Larkspur Lane, going through Grandma May's things, boxes of old clothes, costume jewelry, books with cracked spines. Her steamer trunk sat in the corner, the one she'd brought with her when she first moved into this house. I'd already been through it once, just clothes and mothballs. But this time, lifting out a tray of old scarves, my knuckle caught on something. A seam in the lining. I pulled at it, and the bottom panel shifted. There was a hidden compartment underneath. Inside was a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The paper was thin, almost translucent. The ink had browned with age. They were letters between May Whitfield and Roland Hargrove Sr., dated 1951 and 1952. I sat on the attic floor and read them all. They were love letters. My grandmother and Roland Hargrove had been together, secretly. He'd written to her about their future, how he would marry her, how they'd merge the Whitfield land and the Hargrove land and build something together. He called her My May. She called him My Only. But then his parents found out. They threatened to disown him. And Roland, this man who swore he loved her, chose the money. He didn't just leave her. He stole her land with a forged deed, married a woman his parents picked, and used the 40 acres along the Greendale River as the foundation for everything the Hargroves became. My grandmother wasn't just cheated. She was betrayed by the person she loved most. I couldn't breathe for a minute. I just sat there with the letters in my lap and the dust floating in the light from the little round attic window, and I saw it. Me and Julian, May and Roland. The same story 70 years later. A Whitfield woman loving a Hargrove man and getting destroyed for it. But there was one more letter, separate from the bundle, written in 1987 in a shakier hand. Roland had written it but never sent it. A confession. He wrote, "I built everything on the ruin of the only person who ever truly loved me. He knew. He always knew, and he never made it right. I sat with that letter for a long time. Then I understood this wasn't just about property lines and county records. This was a wound that had been open in my family for generations. Grandma May carried it to her grave. My mother grew up in its shadow, and I almost married into the family that caused it without ever knowing. I also realized something else. The original 40 acres included the plot where the Hargrove estate sits on Piedmont Road, Julian's childhood home, the place where I almost became a Hargrove. I called Nomi. It was past midnight. She picked up on the second ring. "We're not just filing a complaint," I said. "We're reclaiming what was stolen." 8 weeks after the wedding, I stood on the steps of the Greendale County Courthouse holding a file folder thick enough to hurt my wrist. Inside was the forged deed from 1952, Constance Devereaux's sworn affidavit, Roland Hargrove Sr.'s unsent confession from 1987, the original Whitfield property records, May's handwriting samples, everything. We filed a civil suit against the Hargrove Family Trust. Within days, the local news picked it up. Cameras outside the courthouse. My name in headlines I never wanted. I wasn't ready for that part. The staring, the whispers at the grocery store, people I barely knew forming opinions about my life. Richard Hargrove's lawyers came to the table fast. They offered $2 million. $2 million, and all I had to do was sign a non-disclosure agreement and walk away. Let the whole thing disappear. Let the fraud stay buried. Let my grandmother's name stay forgotten. $2 million. I was substitute teaching for $85 a day. I said no. Nomi looked at me after the meeting and said, "You sure?" I was sure. I didn't want their money used to buy my silence. I wanted someone to stand up in a room and say out loud what was done to May Whitfield. The case kept building. A retired county clerk, 80 years old, living in a care home outside Greendale, came forward and confirmed that records had been tampered with in the 1950s. He said the Hargrove family had pressured the office directly. His testimony corroborated everything. And then Julian did something I didn't expect. I heard about it through Nomi first. Julian confronted his father. Apparently, he told Richard, "You let me fall in love with her knowing what we owed her family." Then he issued a public statement. He broke from the Hargroves. He said he believed the Whitfield claim was legitimate, and that the right thing to do was to let the court decide, his own family's heir, siding with me. I think that mattered to the judge. I know it mattered to me, not enough to fix what was broken, but enough to tell me that the man I'd loved wasn't the same man who'd stolen the land. The court ruled in our favor. The 1952 transfer was declared fraudulent. The Whitfield family was awarded rightful ownership of the original 40-acre parcel along the Greendale River, plus compensatory damages. The Hargrove estate on Piedmont Road, the house where Julian grew up, the garden where I almost married him, now legally belonged to me. I stood on the courthouse steps with my mother. Diane was crying, not the polite kind, the kind that comes from somewhere so deep you didn't know it was there. I held her hand. She squeezed so hard it hurt. I looked up at the sky and said it quietly, just for us. Grandma May, we did it. 3 months after the wedding that never happened, I stood on the porch of the Hargrove estate on Piedmont Road, except it wasn't the Hargrove estate anymore. It was ours. Mine. I never moved in. I couldn't. Every room held someone else's history, and I didn't want to live inside the thing that was built on my grandmother's heartbreak. I spent weeks figuring out what to do with it. Selling it felt wrong. Keeping it felt worse. In the end, I turned it into the May Whitfield Community Center, a place for education, legal aid, and local history preservation in Greendale. Her name, on the front of the building. Permanent. Something nobody could take down or talk away. The 40 acres along the Greendale River went into a conservation trust. That land would never be developed, never be sold, never be stolen again. It would just be land, the way it was supposed to be. Constance Devereaux came to the ribbon cutting in a wheelchair. She wept through the whole thing. I held her hand and thanked her, and she shook her head and said, "I should have done it 50 years ago." Maybe, but she did it when it mattered. That counts. My mom planted a garden on the grounds, lavender and marigolds and climbing roses. She said Grandma May always loved flowers but never had enough yard at Larkspur Lane. Now she had acres. Julian and I met one last time, the bench by the Greendale River, the same bench where he'd proposed. It was a cool afternoon. The water was moving slow. He didn't try to win me back. He just sat down and talked. He said he was sorry. Not for what he did, because he hadn't done anything, not deliberately, but for what his family did, and for all the ways he'd benefited from it without ever asking where it came from. He said he understood if I never wanted to see him again. I told him I forgave him, and I meant it. But I also told him we couldn't be together. The wound was too old. It was bigger than us. It lived in the soil and the deed records and my grandmother's handwriting in the margins of a ledger. I couldn't build a life with him on top of that. I just couldn't. He nodded. He didn't argue. We sat there for a while, not talking, just watching the river. Then he stood up, touched my shoulder once, and walked away. I went back to teaching full-time at Greendale Elementary, third graders, spelling tests and glue sticks and lunchroom duty. It was ordinary and good. Every evening, I sit in Grandma May's rocking chair on the porch at 14 Larkspur Lane. I grade papers. I listen to the crickets. I keep a framed photograph of her on the railing next to a jar of wildflowers. I lost the future I thought I was getting. The big house, the Hargrove name, the life that looked so beautiful from the outside. But I got something my grandmother never had. The truth, spoken out loud, in a courtroom, on the record. Justice, and quiet. Real quiet, the kind that comes when you're not carrying someone else's secret anymore. Some nights, when the sky goes purple and the fireflies come out, I whisper to her, "I'm still here, Grandma, and so are you."